Hello. Happy Tuesday. I can never tell if I'm live or not. It says you're live, but then it does this weird thing. Okay, people are coming on, so I think we're live. Hi, everyone. Say hi as you come in. Let me know if you can hear me okay. Give me a thumbs up. Thanks, Eric. All right, so today is a live with Paul Carter. He's actually here, so I am going to somehow figure out how to get him. Okay, here we go. You should be coming on, I think. There we go. Hey, Paul.
Hey, what's going on?
How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you okay. What about me?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay.
I am just trying. Oh, no, that's not right. This is like my first live with someone
Okay.
else in like a year, so bear with me. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm awesome as usual. How's your day been going?
Good, good. I'm excited to kind of do this follow-up. I guess it's a kind of a follow-up Q&A to our podcast that came out last week. I
Right.
got a bunch of new questions that kind of tie into a bunch of the questions from the podcast. So it's, I guess it's kind of like a bonus for everybody. We could
I
call it that.
I figured that it was like it was like an addendum to what we covered in the podcast. So I'm down with it.
Awesome. Cool. So I'm sure we'll have some questions coming up here as people join. So I'll monitor those, but I did get quite a few questions yesterday when I posted the question box. So I tried to combine them because there's quite a bunch. So I tried to combine them to make them as concise as possible
Okay.
and kind of chose the ones that I felt were most relevant to our followers. So do you want me to just start off and kind of maybe rapid fire type
Ab-
situation?
Absolutely. Just go in all guns blazing.
All right, cool. Okay, so if anybody, just a heads up, if anybody hasn't seen the episode that went out last week, it's episode 122. It's titled How to Optimize Hypertrophy Training with the one and only Paul Carter. And it has actually gotten tons of great feedback already, so highly recommend it if you haven't seen it yet. So yeah, let's get into these questions, and I'll try to do my best at monitoring as these other ones come in. So the first question that I got, why is it a good idea to, or no, sorry, I'm already messing this up. When is it a good idea to incorporate intensification techniques into your training? So things like rest pause sets, drop sets, things like that. When would you recommend that?
So that's the kind of thing that you would probably want to incorporate after potentially the first maybe 2 years of really consistent hard training. The first probably 6 months or so of training, most of the muscular adaptations that take place happen because of you're adapting from a neural perspective. So the muscular adaptations that are occurring is because neural adaptations are actually occurring. You're learning how to do the movements, you're learning coordination. So that's enough at that period in order to be a stress that is strong enough to induce muscle growth. So once your body adapts to that, the gains slow down. That's when people get past the new gains and they get into intermediate territory, and then the gains come a little bit slower. And then there comes a point, probably maybe a year and a half or 2 years after that, where the gains have really come to a halt and you just can't progressively overload as often as you once were able to. And that's kind of the point where you may want to start inducing some things like maybe force reps or rest pause or clusters or drop sets or things like that. And the whole point of those is to increase and accumulate the amount of mechanical tension that you're getting within the sets you're performing and then the workout session itself.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. What's your favorite intensification technique? If you have to pick just one, I'm curious.
Um, Gosh, I don't know if I could honestly pick just one. I get into modes where I like one more than the other, and then I'll use it for a while, and I don't want to use it anymore. kind of like, I don't know, like that about food too. Like I'll eat the same thing for months and months and on end, and then I don't want it for 6 months, and then go back to it. But lately, for the past few months, it's been a lot of drop sets. But for years, I did a lot of rest pause training. And then I had long periods of time where I did cluster sets. I think the one that's the most researched is generally drop sets. We have a quite research on drop sets, and it's a very productive method when you equate the volume across drop sets to straight sets. So if you perform 3 sets of 10 to failure and you do 3 sets of 10 on drop sets, the amount of mechanical tension that we see across those is pretty equal. So the one thing that it can do in that regard is that it can save you time, so it can be a little more efficient. The drawback is that because the muscle fibers have to stay active for a longer period, it can be a little bit more fatiguing from a central nervous system standpoint. So there's benefits and drawbacks to that kind of stuff. There's almost always a trade-off. You get a benefit in one area, trade-off that's a negative in another. But I really like drop sets, and I do like rest pause training. Both of those are pretty much the ones that I go to all the time.
Cool. Awesome. Okay, so next question I have is more a general question. Someone asked, do you think nutrition and weight training should change for women who are in their late 50s and above?
Well, I'm not a over 50 woman, so not yet anyway. I haven't decided that I was going to do that, but so I can't speak from a personal, but it really comes back to goals, for example. And that is like if you're an over 50s woman and you're deciding that you want to get into running, doing, triathlons, then your nutrition in that perspective needs to match your training. If you're an over 50 woman and you decide that, hey, I just started lifting and I want to build some muscle mass, then you'll still need to match that particular nutrition to that training approach. So I think sometimes people get a little bit hung up. The only thing I would say is that there is some research out there that suggests as you get a little older, that leucine threshold needed to elevate muscle protein synthesis. We need a little bit more leucine as we get, they say, past 40. And I want to say it's something like 15 to 20 grams of leucine in order to help maximize muscle protein synthesis. I'm just going off memory here on that one. But regardless of your age, you need to remember that basically you just need to do a really good job of making sure that your nutrition and your training basically complement one another. So if you're an over 50 woman, like I said, you're going to go do distance running, but you're trying to do a keto diet, probably not a great idea. So if you're over 50 woman and you say, I've just taken up walking and I just want to lose some pounds, then just getting into a mindful calorie deficit would be a great approach. So really that's kind of the way that I would say, kind of the overall high level view of looking at it.
Yeah, for sure. That totally makes sense. I agree with that too. And just in general, from like my research and perspective, one of the biggest things with like aging in terms of nutrition is usually protein intake. Like you said, leucine, like paying attention to that. What would you say, like if someone listening doesn't have any idea what leucine threshold is, can you quickly explain that in like a minute maybe?
So leucine is the primary amino acid responsible for turning on mTOR, and mTOR is directly responsible for signaling muscle protein synthesis, which helps to rebuild and repair muscle protein. So if your leucine intake isn't high enough, as you get older, you have to have a certain amount of leucine intake, then you won't get that effect. Now, the truth is, if you're getting enough protein in, if you're getting adequate protein in, that's generally not a problem. So I don't want people to fret over this.
For sure.
I think as soon as you bring up those topics, people they become incredibly nuanced, and I'm just, at the end of the day, just make sure you're getting an adequate protein and you'll pretty much be covered.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Okay, someone asked, I'm going to just jump in here with a question from someone live. Fasted weight training, yes or no?
I don't really necessarily have a problem with it, but there's been a pretty decent amount of research and data that's come out lately that basically fasted people who use like fasting approaches, especially when weight training, tend to have a higher degree of muscle loss in hypocaloric states, and they don't accumulate as many new contractile proteins when weight training either. So there's definitely a detrimental effect. I know that there's also the argument on the flip side of that, because I always like to look and know both sides. The other side of that is that after you've been lifting, if you lifted fasted, the muscle protein synthesis effect is exacerbated when you intake protein after. The other thing that becomes more paramount is when you get protein in directly after a fasted training session. It's far more important that you have nutrients coming in. Really, that the quote unquote anabolic window that people like to make fun of actually does become more important if you're going to train fasted. My thing is this: I've trained fasted before. I don't necessarily have if you like training fasted or whatever, but I will say that training fed, there's a multitude of benefits that we know about training fed, and there's definitely no drawback to training in a fed state. Whereas fasting, training in a fasted state, and I'm talking as far as lifting, there's definitely drawbacks that appear to come with weight training in fasted state. I just say this: if you're trying to gain muscle, there's nothing anabolic about not eating.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's, like, in the fasting community, there's been, some kind of like misinterpretation of the literature when it comes to that, like growth hormone increases when you're fasting, and people start to equate that with more muscle growth. And it's like, we're kind of mixing some things up here.
Topic before, for example, it's an acute growth hormone spike. It's basically related to your body knowing that you're hungry and saying, hey, you need to get out there and find some food. But it's not enough of a growth hormone spike that it's going to make any difference in terms of body composition or new muscle growth or anything like that. So I think that gets overstated quite often, because they see something and they say, oh, there's more growth hormone. Technically, there is more growth hormone released during extended fasting states, but it's just an acute release, and it has nothing to do with actually growing more muscle. You used to hear the same argument about testosterone and weight training. Like when you use the big lifts, there's more testosterone release, but it was really to muscle, and it was an acute testosterone release. So it's not enough that you're going to build more muscle than somebody who's not doing big compound lifts. So a lot of that stuff gets blown out of proportion.
Yeah, for sure. That makes sense. All right. So next question, I'm trying to keep this to like no more than 30 minutes.
Okay.
So can you explain what a resistance profile is and why it matters?
Yeah. So a resistance profile basically just says where the exercise is hardest and where it's easiest. So if you do a squat and you go to the bottom of the squat feels hard, really hard at the bottom and sometimes in the middle. So generally speaking, a squat would have like a descending resistance curve. So it's hard at the bottom and gets easier as you get to the top and your joints are stacked. A bench press will be similar. So it's hard at the bottom, and as you press and get closer to the top and your joints are stacked and you have more leverage over the load, then it also has a descending resistance profile. If you're doing something like a side lateral, it gets harder as you get near the end, at the top of the range of motion. So that would have an ascending resistance profile. The reason why that resistance profiles are important is because of the length to tension relationship. When you want to talk about maximizing the amount of muscle growth that you have in a particular muscle, we want to stress it across different lengths. And so when a muscle gets stressed across different lengths, there's actually different divisions and different regions within the division that get maximally stressed during particular peaks in tension. So that's why it's not enough to just go do bench press and fully develop your pecs, or just do overhead press and fully develop your shoulders. You're not just dealing with a multitude of different divisions in a muscle, but you're also dealing with different regions. And different regions within that muscle will get stressed more or less depending on where the maximal amount of force has to be generated in relation to the length of that muscle.
Okay. All makes sense. A lot to unpack there. Cool. I mean, that was a great explanation of resistance profile, so I have nothing to add. Cool. I just want to make sure I'm not missing any questions. If you do have any questions that come up, feel free to add them in the comments here, and I'll try to catch them. All right. So the next question: how do you address asymmetry in the body? For example, if one of my pecs is bigger and sits lower.
So I think this is, believe it or not, one of those questions that really kind of irritate me, because you don't end up, if you're a full grown adult and you've been weight training for any amount of time, you're going to have some asymmetrical development.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's pretty much all of us have one leg that's maybe a little bit longer than the other. And the idea that all of your stuff is created the same from left to right side, I don't know where that came from, but all of us, basically, there's also a lot of belief in the evolutionary process that one side of us is more dominant as a degree of basically advantage in our everyday life. So we tend to be more dominant, say if we're right-handed or left-handed, and that is often due to particular leverages in the way our brain works in the nervous system, things like that. So if you have one side that's more developed than the other, I personally have never seen, and this is spanning like 3 decades now of lifting, I've never seen anyone really bring up one really super weak side to match the other, especially if they've been lifting for an extended period of time. So there's lots of women that be like, my left glute's like quite a bit smaller than my right. And then they go off and they do a whole bunch of, like a unilateral work for their left glute, and they might make some improvements, but that one side's always going to be way more dominant. So if somebody has like one pec that looks maybe like it's smaller, it could also just be due to an origin and insertion thing too, that it's just shaped a little different than the other pec as well, and it's just never going to have that perfect symmetrical A to B side look in the pec. So I don't do the whole thing where I still do program unilateral work, but that's the key. Basically, I think the one good thing about that is that you can shore up a small amount of imbalances, but it's just to try to keep a certain amount of strength balance throughout the entire body. But
Mm-hmm.
perspective of trying to shore up something, say I've got this one triceps really gigantic, and the other one looks like, it's from a newborn baby or whatever. I've never seen anybody that's been able to just like blow up that whole weak side to completely match the strong side of their body.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough one. It's kind of like spot reduce. I don't know, this just came to mind, like spot reducing fat. Like we all want to like spot reduce fat in our, and usually the place that we lose it from is lat. Sorry.
Up, right? It's like guys will come up and go that, and they'll say like, I'm really lean all over except I have love handles. I'm like, then you're not really lean all over. Like that's a pretty, like, what do you do to get rid of, like, you keep losing fat? That's it. That's the only fat.
Yeah, patience is the hack to that, unfortunately. Cool. Okay, so the next question, we have 4 more here, and then if anybody has any, just jump in and leave them in the comments. Would you count a collagen supplement towards your daily protein intake?
Definitely not.
Can you explain why?
Because it's not, I don't consider it, because collagen is not a complete protein. When I talk about protein intake, I'm looking at a full amino acid spectrum of the essential amino acids, and then the rest of the spectrum of amino acids. And I would not count that as toward, to me, a total protein intake for the day is comprised of what I would consider more complete protein sources, where they have all of the essential amino acids and then the rest of the non-essential amino acids, or at least some subset of those non-essential amino acids in conjunction with them. Instead of just, it'd be like saying you would count your BCAA intake towards your total protein intake. And I don't think anybody would ever say you would count BCAA intake towards daily protein intake.
Mm-hmm. So in the sense of like the other, like if you're tracking your food throughout the day and you have, you're using your tracker and you have, protein, and you notice that a lot of that protein is coming from like other sources that aren't maybe animal based or complete protein sources, would you track that too, or are you just like solely focused on complete protein sources towards that? Because I know that's a lot of people get confused on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's still going to be a caloric content that is associated with it, but I would still recommend just only, if you're going to be tracking protein, I would suggest tracking what are basically the most complete protein. But now I know, like, for example, if you were a vegan or vegetarian, somebody might go, well, what if you're vegan or vegetarian? Well, I mean, that's a whole different ballgame. That's not even my wheelhouse that I play in. So, but even in that case, there's a lot of like vegan protein powders out now that have complete protein profiles. So, but from a
Mhm.
collagen standpoint, I personally would not, like if I've got clients that use collagen, I'm just like add it in there. But the idea that you could also turn collagen to fat or collagen protein sources to fat are pretty much zero. So I wouldn't worry about that either.
Okay, cool. Awesome advice. Um, Sorry, I'm just reading these to make sure I didn't miss any. Okay, the next one is one of the most popular questions. Do you take pre-workout? If so, what ingredients do you think really make a difference?
I don't take pre-workout and I really never have.
Okay. Do you think that there's any ingredients in that are in common pre-workouts that could be beneficial or based off of your research at all?
So, like, there's at least been a pretty good change of direction in terms of pre-workout. It used to be pre-workout was basically like crushed up crack, cocaine with, like whatever how was it Heisenberg? Yeah, Heisenberg methamphetamine dose that you had that they would crush up together and put in with some caffeine and you stuff and be like blitzed out of your mind for about the next 6 hours. And that was pre-workout back in the day. I don't know if anybody remember. I think it was Explode and stuff like that. And people used to take that stuff and be jacked up. But everything's had a nice transition, at least over into what I'd consider like it's a lot of vasodilation now. So
Mhm.
vasodilation is basically an improvement in the oxygenation that you have and that you're working with from a physiological perspective. And a lot of people do find that helpful, that they have more energy. I personally just don't add any pre-workout because I like to know how my body is feeling on its own from just food, rest, sleep, the training stimulus, and that kind of stuff. One of the reasons why I was pretty much against pre-workout back in the day was the constant adrenaline spike that you would get off of that kind of stuff. And I felt like that was pretty detrimental to the parasympathetic nervous system because you still need your rest and digest nervous system to come back up to baseline in order to recover from your training. I would bet if somebody could look at heart rate variability back then, there would be a significant downturn and trending in that because of the fact that you're just constantly amped and geeked up on that stuff. And I don't know if the ones now, even with the vasodilators, if they have any similar effect, but I just consistently try to see how I'm feeling and going with anything from my circadian rhythms to my sleep to my eating to like my overall general sense of well-being and that kind of stuff. And that's something I think people should do a better job of getting tuned into is how your body is actually feeling because you grow and get stronger when you allow the adaptations to occur, and that only occurs if enough recovery, if you have enough ability to recover from the stimulus that you're providing from your training sessions. So if you're constantly adding in ways that you can get up for training and you're geeked up, that sympathetic nervous system, then when is it that you're recovering and you're allowing those adaptations to occur from the stimulus that you cause in the training session itself? So I don't use any pre-workout, and I don't have anything against the vasodilators. I think you can actually go pretty good with dark chocolate and pomegranate juice as good vasodilators. So from that alone, you can actually work with that, and those are what I consider more natural. But I think I'm starting to sound like some kind of Karen that works at a Catholic store right now. But I effective if you want to work with something that's working from a vasodilation. You can look into something like I said as pure as dark chocolate and pomegranate juice, and that tends to have a pretty good effect as well.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I love that. And I think one of the most underrated pre-workouts is salt, just adding some sodium. Do you take,
Absolutely.
do you do that at all?
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
Cool.
Especially just overall, my sodium intake is fairly high. I would say between 3,000, 4,000 milligrams a day. So I tend to salt everything pretty heavily. But I think for the people who are actually suffering sometimes and think they need that, I would totally advise them to upping their sodium intake for a few days because sodium is the transport agent. So they should actually feel a lot better. If you're low on electrolytes, I can promise you your energy is going to plummet.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I feel like so many people, I mean, I think we've gotten away from it, at least over the last few years, but everybody's so scared of salt for so long. But it can make such a big difference. So cool. Question here, should you be working each muscle group 2 times a week to build muscle?
You can, but there's nothing when that there's a meta-analysis that Brad Schoenfeld put out a while back that had a pretty high inclusion and exclusion criteria for it. And what they showed over those studies was what I had been saying for a few decades, but all of the natty bros that said forever that muscle frequency was super important, they got shot in the nuts about that. So what we actually found out was that when volume was equated over the training week, that training frequency made no difference. So whether you're training a muscle group on a bro split, which is all I've ever used, a bro split where you're hitting a muscle group once a week, or you're using, say, an upper lower split or a full body split, what they found was it's really just all preference when your volume is equated for over the course of the training week. So if you're doing 10 sets of chest on Monday, and you want to do 5 sets on Monday, and then you want to do, say, 5 sets on Thursday, the results of hypertrophy, the outcome from that's going to be pretty much equal. Some people will say that splitting that out over 2 sessions allows you to do more volume. What I would argue in that particular sense is that there's always an inverse U curve associated with real training volume, and that is the number of truly hard sets that you're doing that have a close proximity to failure or to failure. So you're going to run up against that ceiling at some point anyway. And I would also suggest anybody that's actually training with any, just a modicum of serious effort in their working sets aren't going to be doing anywhere near as much volume as they have been if they actually start training with a high level of effort and to failure. So there's no significant benefit to training a muscle group multiple times a week. I can even make the argument that you can be short-circuiting your efforts, because if you haven't recovered from a peripheral perspective and you go train so that muscle still has muscle damage or still hasn't recovered from the last session, and you go and train it, then what happens is muscle protein synthesis gets turned on, but because that muscle hasn't recovered, there's nothing that actually happens. The body says, oh, well, I'm actually still working on repairing this damage that you did from last time, so just go away. So you literally train to just get more tired.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that sucks. We talked about that a lot on the podcast too.
Yeah, that's why people, instead of focusing on volume or instead of focusing on frequency, I think what people need to be focused on is they need to be focused on if they're training hard enough to accumulate enough tension to cause a need for adaptation. And they need to be focusing on progressive overload. If you're doing glute bridges or thrusts with 225 for 8 reps today, and you're not doing any more than that in 6 months from now, guess what? Not going to happen. You're not going to have any muscle growth. You got to give your body a reason to grow. So the focus that people need to be having in their daily trainings are accumulating mechanical tension through training either to failure or very close to failure. And they need to be focused on breaking rep PRs in those good rep ranges, 6, 8, 10, 12 rep ranges. So that's where the most efficient rep ranges for growth tend to be.
Gotcha. Would you say, this is a question for me, would you say that there is maybe like people can kind of, there can be a downside to always trying to like beat your logbook week after week after week? Would you say that that can be like we can go too far with that, or have you seen that?
I think that there has to be periods from also an emotional standpoint that it can wear on you after a while when you go in. And there's just that daunting task of consistently trying to break the previous training sessions performance or output. So there's a couple of things there. Number one is that as you get more advanced, progressive overload is not going to happen on a workout to workout session. Back when I was powerlifting, sometimes you train for 3 months to add 5 to 10 pounds to a particular lift, one of the big 3 lifts. So for somebody that's training for hypertrophy, you might go weeks at a time and people will say this lift has stalled or hasn't progressed, and that's just really not true because, for example, single joint movements don't tend to have as big a jumps in progressive overload from a weight perspective as, say, multi-joint movements. But the other thing is that as you get more advanced and your body adapts to the stress that you're continuously throwing at it, it can just take a longer period of time for those adaptations to manifest in the way of new or more contractile proteins. So, and that's why people will be like, oh, well, I haven't made progress on this one movement for like 3 workouts. I'm like, 3 workouts ain't shit. Okay to also say mentally, like from an emotional standpoint, I'm just really tired of doing. That's another part of training, is I'm tired. Like I'm tired of squatting. Like I don't want to squat for like high reps after a while. Like it's very daunting. or I don't want to deadlift anymore. I don't do those lifts anymore at all anyway. But the point is, training should still be fun. And I think when training is fun, there tends to be that drive to continuously improve. So I think you also have to do your own mental, emotional temperature check to see where you feel about training at the time. So I've gone times where I've gone 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks or longer and crushed every workout. And then sometimes you go 6 weeks or 5 weeks or whatever, and you're like, I just need to take a deload for a few days or a week, or I need to change out some movements that I'm really tired of doing, or so forth and so on. So that's kind of an independent kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. That makes total sense. Um, Someone said these conversations make me happy. Awesome.
All right. I have to put a smile on
Cool.
people's faces.
Okay, so do you have a few more minutes? I have two questions left here.
Okay.
Um, One of them, okay, yeah. Yeah, two. So do you think it's important to train abs? And if you do, what would be your number one exercise?
So I have a joke. Anytime somebody asks me about ab programming in any of my groups, my joke is I'd rather spend the day masturbating with a cheese grater than to program abs. So that's
I've seen you say that.
really all I need to say about training or programming abs.
Got it.
What
So
was the
the second question is, if you did, what would be your number one exercise?
anything where I'm actually doing some degree of like, and this is probably from some a-hole in one of my groups because they always ask about they ask about ab training. I'm like, guys, I'm not. You can do your ab training at home, but something where you're actually where you have spinal flexion. A lot of people will do that stuff where they hang, do the leg raises. I'm like, well, that's nice that you're training your hip flexors and stuff. You're not really training your abs very well that way. So something where you have a degree of spinal flexion, because your abs are the antagonists to the erectors, and your erectors create spinal extension. So your abs are going to do spinal flexion. So something where you're doing a spinal flexion. So believe it or not, something as a crunch done properly is a perfectly good ab exercise. And so stuff like that, or where you go ahead and you do hip flexion and you hold hip flexion. So you're doing a hanging leg raise in hip flexion. And then you actually have spinal flexion where you curl your body up. Either one of those, the upper or the lower division of the abs will work just fine. But I literally every once in a while I'll do some ab work and I'll get on a kick, be like, I want to do some abs, and I'll do it for a couple of weeks and I'll just walk out of the gym and just forget.
Got it. Yeah. I think I used to always, focus on a lot of different core stuff. And I found like the spinal flexion stuff, that is mostly what I'm like missing within my training. So I've been doing that, but I think that is something that I made the mistake for a while, was when I was doing like the leg raises, I was just doing like hip flexion. It wasn't getting the full spinal flexion. And I see that a lot, but once you can correct that, it can be an amazing exercise. If you do want to train your abs. Cool. Okay, last question. This is kind of a fun one. If you could only eat one meal for the rest of your life, what would it be?
If I could only eat one, I've had asked that one a lot, and I'm a massive foodie. For anybody that's followed me long enough to have seen my cheat meals over the years, and it's difficult to say, but believe it or not, of all things, I would have to say that that Southwest chicken fajita omelet from IHOP and blueberry or chocolate chip pancakes.
Okay.
That's it. Like, so you get like a good amount of protein and fats in. I'm still thinking like a meathead, right? And then you get some
Yeah.
I mean, that's to me, like, that's one of my favorite cheat meals over the years, and it really sits well with me. And I've always think that I was like, I could literally eat this every single day, and I'm pretty much about that with most of my food choices. But if I just had to pick, if I'm on a deserted island and I don't know how long I'm going to be there, and it's going to be decades, and you give me that Southwest chicken fajita omelet with some salsa and sour cream and some big blueberry pancakes, I could probably eat that 3 times a day. Perfectly happy for a very long time.
You're making me hungry. I love it. Awesome. All right. Well, this was fun. I know we're we're right at like 35 minutes. I know we had some other questions coming in, but maybe we can do a follow-up another time. Yeah, do you have anything else you want to share for anybody?
Hit me with a couple more if you got them.
So one question here. Let's see. How do you manage to consume 200 grams of protein daily, primarily meats and protein supplements? Question mark.
That I don't understand why it would ever be hard to eat 200 grams of protein in a day. Like if you have, you can make. Think about this: like two protein shakes with two scoops in each is about 100 grams of protein or very close to it. 100 grams of protein from food sources is not very much. So I generally eat about 300 grams of protein every day, and that's not that much for me. But 200 grams of protein, two protein shakes, let's see, probably a cup with of egg whites with two whole eggs, 6 ounces of chicken breast. You're going to be getting pretty close.
Hmm.
Not a not a ton of food.
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the biggest things is just increasing the quantity of like your lean meat sources. That's like the easiest
That's the other.
way.
People are like, how do you get 200 grams of protein? Like, you just eat more food. Like, I don't know no magic way to go about this.
Yeah. Well, that helped. I think that helped.
Yeah.
Okay, this will be the last one. Hip and mobility tips. It's kind of general, but or
Anytime talking about something that's going on with mobility, my first thought is this: is that do you actually lack mobility, or do you actually just lack the strength to hold a particular position as you're moving through your hips through space? So I don't know if you remember, I'm sure you do, like years ago when all the mobility shit came out with that jackass Kelly Starrett and all the whole supple leopard and all that crap came out. And then he got everybody sold on the fact that they were all too stiff and couldn't move and blah, blah. And really what it came back to was people, for the most part, that thought they had quote unquote mobility problems were really just weak. And what people will often find is that if they just get stronger overall, using good mechanics and using good exercises with good mechanics, those are all corrective exercises. Good mechanics will take your body through ranges of motion that it's in an authentic way that that's supposed to be. But I posted about that the last few days with people consistently trying to articulate scapular position while their humerus moves and how that actually messes up your shoulders. But there's this whole thing throughout the fitness community that believes you're supposed to be locking down your scapula and moving your scapula
Mhm.
specific positions as you do like presses and rows and pull downs and stuff. And it's just absolute garbage nonsense. So people often think that they are immobile or they lack mobility, and maybe they do, but the first test that has to happen is, are you just too weak to move into a particular position or hold that particular position? And I haven't found anyone that I've like worked with over the years when I get in person with them that really needed a bunch of mobility work. More often than not, they just needed to fix their mechanics. And when you fix somebody's mechanics, what happens is that their body is able to move in those particular planes of motion in a better way to help both stabilize and do the dynamic work that's involved in those particular movements. And then all of a sudden, because they're moving more authentically in conjunction with their structure, they're moving in a much stronger, more organic way. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I didn't need mobility work. I just needed to fix my mechanics in those particular exercises. And then once I got strong on them, I had all the mobility that I needed. And that has been what I've consistently found to be the problem more times than not.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, just getting proper execution and getting stronger in general can fix so many different things.
Getting strong,
Um,
especially with good mechanics, fixes so many, I would say fixes 99% of the problems.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Cool. Okay, so we have a bunch of other questions coming in, but I think we'll cap it for today.
Okay.
So do you want to just tell everybody where they can find you, just in case they're not sure?
I mean, generally just here for the most part.
Instagram?
Yeah, I mean, this is pretty. I have my main account that I finally got back, and then I have the other backup account, which is Coach Paul Carter. And what I just basically do with the backup account is I just move some of my content over there periodically. And I don't answer any questions or anything over there. It's just a backup in case Instagram tries to freak out and thinks that I'm a sex slave account for what that's what they thought. I was a prostitution account. And I was like, okay.
Oh my God.
I have so many jokes I can make about that, but I'm going to try to stay good.
Oh man. All right. So follow you on Lift Run Bang. And if anybody hasn't tuned into the podcast, you can find it on YouTube. I highly recommend watching it on YouTube because Paul explains a lot of things with his hands, and he goes through a lot of things. So it's really awesome to watch.
I do that, and I'm not even Italian.
Awesome. All right. Anything else you want to share before we go?
No, I'm good to go.
Sweet. All right. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. And thank you to everybody who tuned in. I will share this on IGTV for anybody who missed it. And hopefully you can do it again soon.
All right. Appreciate you having me on. It's a good time.
You too. All right. I'll see you soon.
Have a good one.
Bye.